Hi, this is Steve Hicks again, and I'd like to talk to you about oil tanks, a fascinating subject, I'm sure, but something you should be aware of. On Queen Anne Hill, I would guess, I mean, this is just a crazy guess, but I would guess 85% of the houses have an oil tank somewhere buried on their property because oil was a predecessor to gas in terms of its ability to heat a home. So a tank usually was buried under the ground. Sometimes the tanks were above ground. You would see them and get rid of them when you converted your house to gas heat. Perhaps you bought a house that was already converted to gas heat, and for some reason you were not informed as to whether or not there was an oil tank on the property. Certainly in the last 10 years, you should have been informed of that. Any competent real estate agent would have ascertained whether or not there was an oil tank on the property you were buying and hopefully given you a certificate for decommissioning of that tank. Decommissioning of an oil tank basically means emptying it out of the mix of oil and water that's been sitting in the bottom of it for who knows how many years, triple rinsing it with trisodium phosphate, which is a cleaner. And in Seattle now, in the last few years, it's now required to fill it with concrete slurry, basically concrete, and then removing the cap that it used to allow the oil man to fill the tank with oil. So it can now no longer be used for anything. It becomes an oval-sized rock under your lot. And as such, it can't corrode and leak that residual oil and water under the ground and wind up in your neighbor's basement, which would be not a good thing to have happen. So there's a sound environmental reason why, if you have an oil tank on your property, you should get it decommissioned, and I would recommend doing that prior to going on the market so that you can get this certificate, put it on your listing, the buyer sees it, they acknowledge with their signature that it's done and it's not a problem, then they keep it for their records for when they sell their house. How we discover if you have an oil tank on your property, if you don't already know that or did not inherit a decommissioning certificate when you bought the house, would be simply give me a call and I can give you the name and phone number of a couple of companies that do oil tank locates. And what they do is they go out with a metal detector because the tank is made of steel, and they can go around your lot and see if you have an oil tank. If you have an oil tank, then usually they'll give you a bid on what it would take to decommission it. If you don't have an oil tank, they will assume the liability by writing a letter stating that you don't have one, that their due diligence in looking around your lot did not determine that there was an oil tank in your property, and the liability for that goes onto their shoulders. So obviously they're going to be very sure that there is no oil tank on your property, and you can give that to your prospective buyer and they'll feel all warm and fuzzy that they're buying a house with no oil tank that hasn't been decommissioned on the property. The cost to decommission an oil tank runs about $1,000 for a 300-gallon tank. And 300 gallons is the most common size. I've seen the tanks run all the way up to, oh my God, 3,000 gallons, 4,000 gallons, something like that for the larger homes on the southwest slope. But basically you should figure $900 to $1,000 to get that decommissioned and get your certificate for a 300-gallon tank. Hopefully that's helpful. Call me if you have any questions on this. Thanks for listening.